A strange man kissed my wife at the company party and asked her to marry him. I had no reaction. It was as if time had stopped around me, as if the ground had disappeared and I was falling into an endless abyss. The party lights, the laughter in the background, the clinking of champagne glasses, everything faded into the background. What mattered was that absurd scene before my eyes. She didn't back down. Didn't push him. I didn't say anything. She just stood there, paralyzed, as if waiting for something. As if that wasn't a surprise to her. My heart was beating wildly, my stomach was churning with nausea. I couldn't breathe properly. I swallowed hard, trying to force my mind to find some logic to what was happening. Maybe it was a bad joke, maybe he was drunk, maybe, no. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. It was real. What is all this? My voice was weak, but filled with disbelief. My eyes bored into hers, searching for any trace of regret, guilt, surprise. But there was none of that. Just a hesitation. A split second in which she looked away, as if she knew she needed to find an answer, but didn't have a convincing one. The silence between us stretched on for too long. The people around continued the party as if nothing had happened. But for me, that moment had already changed everything. I can explain, she murmured, but her voice was choked. Could you explain? Explain what? That an unknown man, in the middle of a work party, kissed her for no apparent reason and on top of that asked her to marry him? Explain why she didn't react. Explain why she didn't seem surprised. I didn't want to hear explanations. I wanted to get out of there, I wanted to wake up and realize that it was all a nightmare. But it wasn't. My blood boiled. I felt the anger building inside me, the frustration, the humiliation. All the years of marriage, all the promises, all the nights I lay next to her believing we were happy, believing we were loyal to each other, it all felt like a farce. Like a house of cards about to collapse. Who is he? My voice was firmer now, cutting like a blade. She hesitated again. The man, the bold, brazen one, looked at me with a half-smile on his lips, as if he knew he had one. As if my indignation was useless. Something inside me screamed that there was more there, that this was just the tip of the iceberg. I need time to explain to you, she insisted. Time? Time for what? To come up with a convincing lie. To think of an excuse that would make me believe I was exaggerating. I felt my chest burning. I wouldn't be made a fool of. It's over, the words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. There was no hesitation, there was no regret. If there was something to be explained, it no longer mattered. I knew enough. She was no longer mine. Her eyes widened, as if she hadn't expected me to make a decision so quickly. Maybe she believed I would fight, beg, argue. But no. I wouldn't give her that taste. I turned around, leaving her behind, feeling the stares burning into my back. The air of the party became suffocating. The whole thing was a hoax. The pain of betrayal was an open wound, a burning scar. But I wouldn't let this story end like that. If she thought she could simply destroy our story, deceive me and start over with another man without consequences, she was wrong. I needed to know who this man really was. I needed to know why he had the audacity to do that in front of me, as if he was sure there was nothing I could do. And then, I decided to act. I did something that revealed who he really was. Something that completely changed the course of this story. And when the truth came out, when all the pieces fell into place, the betrayal stopped being just a blow to my heart. It has become a game. And in this game, I wouldn't come out as the loser. But what did I do? What did I discover? And how did this story end? That, you don't know yet. But you'll soon know. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not and will never support treason. All the stories you hear are fictional, but they reflect an undeniable truth. betrayal destroys lives, corrodes relationships and leaves marks that never fade. Our goal is to show the real impact of bad choices and the inevitable consequences of disloyalty. Now get ready for a story shocking, intense and full of twists and turns. Listen carefully, because some truths are more painful than they seem. The ballroom was lit with soft lights, reflecting off the crystal glasses and the well-trained smiles of the guests. The music in the background mixed with the sound of toasts and lively conversations. It was a special night for everyone at the company, a celebration that brought together employees, directors, and their families in an elegant environment, marked by refinement and the promises of a promising new year. Among the couples that stood out in the room were Daniel and Sophie, who for years had been one of those couples that seemed perfect. Aligned smiles, delicate gestures, an apparent connection that made them admired and even envied by some. Daniel had a confident stance, the kind of man who naturally earned respect. He had worked at the company long enough to have a stable position, recognized for his efforts and dedication to his work. Since joining, he has always maintained an image of professionalism and commitment, a man of solid principles and unquestionable loyalty. By his side, Sophie was the wife everyone saw as exemplary. Owner of a captivating look and a striking presence, she seemed to fit perfectly into the life they built together. Intelligent, engaging and charismatic, it was easy for anyone to like her. Anyone who saw them together believed that they were the portrait of an ideal marriage, one that overcame challenges without interruption. Their story was built on solid foundations. They met while still at college, where he was studying administration and she was dedicated to communications. The relationship grew along with their careers, going through the ups and downs of youth, maturing over the years. Daniel has always been a man of traditional values, one of those who believed that marriage was an unbreakable commitment. Sophie, on the other hand, carried a freer spirit, but loved the stability and security that Daniel provided her. The years passed and together they built a comfortable life, surrounded by mutual friends, trips, shared dreams and moments that seemed eternal. That night's party was another one of the events that Daniel insisted on participating in alongside his wife. He always liked to show off Sophie, proud of the woman he had married. It wasn't just because of her undeniable beauty, but because of the way she captivated people, making any environment lighter and more pleasant. Sophie liked this attention, but over time, the predictability of the relationship made her feel something that she avoided admitting even to herself, a certain emptiness, a silent restlessness that accompanied her without her being able to explain why. Daniel, however, never noticed. For him, everything was fine. His routine involved work, responsibilities and time with Sophie, which was always his priority. He saw no reason to question anything. He loved his wife and believed she loved him in the same way. But deep down, Sophie missed something she couldn't define. Something he didn't dare confess out loud. The night continued in a celebratory atmosphere, toasts were raised and promises of success were made amidst polite smiles. Daniel and Sophie greeted colleagues, exchanged small talk and moved around the room without any suspicion that that night would remain forever marked in their lives. Daniel held his wife's waist naturally, showing affection and possession at the same time. Sophie smiled at him, but her attention seemed scattered at times, as if there was something unsaid hanging in the air. The environment was charged with energy, a mix of enthusiasm and euphoria that made each interaction more intense. People drank, laughed loudly and indulged in small excesses. After all, it was a party. But to Daniel, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was just another pleasant night with his wife, a celebration that would end like so many others, with the two returning home together, sharing a last toast before bed. But there was something different in Sophie's eyes that night. Something that Daniel, no matter how attentive he was, could not perceive. The restlessness she felt seemed to have found a reason to exist, an answer that until then she had not allowed herself to seek. Minutes passed and, without Daniel being able to predict, something was about to happen that would completely change the perception he had about love, loyalty and, above all, about who was really by his side. At that moment, he still didn't know. He still believed that the party would end as always, that Sophie was his, that nothing could shake the life they built together. But the truth was there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The music enveloped the room, mixing with the sound of voices and glasses clinking during toasts. The air was filled with laughter, lively conversations, and glances exchanged between strangers and acquaintances that, for a few hours, seemed more intimate than they really were. Daniel moved between groups of people, greeting colleagues, responding to formal greetings, and holding Sophie's waist tightly, as he always did. He liked to maintain his presence by her side, to feel that the woman he loved so much was there, within his reach. But Sophie, that night, seemed different. It wasn't something obvious, nothing that could be said out loud, but something in her posture, in the way her eyes swept the room as if searching for something. She smiled, talked, leaned towards him at times, touched the arm of an acquaintance while laughing at some random joke said. Daniel liked to see her like this, radiant, captivating as always. But something inside him felt a slight uneasiness, a subtle detail that he couldn't name, but that made him observe her more closely. Maybe it was just the effect of the champagne, maybe it was the atmosphere, the music, the relaxed atmosphere. He didn't worry. There was no reason for that. Time passed and Sophie seemed more and more at ease, moving around the room with a fluid naturalness. Daniel got involved in conversations with coworkers and, at one point, lost sight of her. It wasn't something that worried him right away. He knew that Sophie liked to talk, to be sociable, to move around in groups. But, after a few minutes, a subtle discomfort began to settle in his chest. He looked around, trying to find her, and when he finally saw her, something inside him shuddered. She was near the bar, and she wasn't alone. A man beside her, well-dressed, with a confident posture, said something that made her smile. But it wasn't just any smile, it wasn't the casual smile she distributed so naturally. It was a smile that carried something more. Daniel narrowed his eyes, trying to take in the scene before him. The man leaned slightly closer to her, and Sophie didn't back away. There was a sparkle in her eyes that Daniel had never seen before, or perhaps never allowed himself to see. He walked slowly towards the two, not knowing exactly what he would do or say when he got there. His heart beat faster, but his mind refused to accept any possibility that went beyond an innocent conversation. But then, before he could reach them, he saw it. The man touched Sophie's hand, running his fingers over her skin in a way that wasn't done with anyone else. And she allowed it. He didn't pull his hand away, he didn't move away. His smile remained there, intact, as if that touch was something expected. Daniel's chest tightened. Every step he took made it harder to breathe. Sophie then looked at him, and in that instant, the sparkle in her eyes wavered. There was a small start, a hesitation. She knew she had been seen, but instead of letting go of the man beside her, she just looked down for a moment, as if she was preparing for something. Daniel stopped, a few meters away from the two, feeling a wave of mixed emotions swirling inside him. He opened his mouth to say something, but before any words were spoken, the man took the initiative. Without any embarrassment, without any hesitation, he turned to Daniel and smiled. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he cupped Sophie's face and kissed her. There, in front of everyone. In front of him. Daniel's world collapsed in an instant. The ballroom, the guests, the voices, the music, everything disappeared. Time seemed to stop. The only thing that existed was that scene before his eyes, like a slow and cruel stab. Sophie didn't push the man. He didn't push him away. She stood there, receiving that kiss, and in that second, Daniel knew. I knew there was nothing more to be said. That any words that came out of his mouth would be irrelevant. That everything he believed to be solid had crumbled without warning. The man walked away and then looked at Daniel with a half-smile, as if he had just claimed something that already belonged to him. Daniel's chest burned. Sophie turned to him, her eyes carrying a demand for an explanation that she was unable to give. But the betrayal was already there, visible, irreversible. Daniel felt a bitter taste in his mouth. For a moment he thought about shouting, about questioning her, about demanding answers. But the truth is that, at that moment, he already knew he didn't want to hear them. The silence between the three was louder than anything that could be said. The weight of betrayal had settled there, irreversible, unbearable. But Daniel didn't know that this was just the beginning. And that the truth that had not yet been revealed was much worse than he could imagine. Daniel spent the next few days in a silent daze, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The scene at the party replayed in his mind like an endless nightmare, every detail cruelly recorded, every expression, every silence, every touch. He had left the party without looking back, without giving Sophie a chance to explain, without confronting the man who felt comfortable enough to kiss his wife in front of everyone. But her silence said it all. There was nothing to explain. There were no acceptable excuses. Their marriage was over. But something inside him wouldn't let him just accept that and move on. The way the man smiled, the way Sophie hesitated before saying anything, the way it happened in front of so many people without it seeming like a shock to everyone around. Something didn't make sense. He knew he needed to discover the truth, not because he wanted to save something that was already dead, but because he needed to understand at what point he had become a stranger within his own life. He hired a private detective, something he never imagined he would do, but now seemed like the only option. He wanted to know who that man was. I needed to know. And when he received the first information, he felt a chill run up his spine. The man who kissed his wife was not a simple stranger. He had a history of scams, dubious involvements and a trail of deceived people. But the worst part was yet to come. The evidence accumulated as the detective deepened the investigation. The man, named Victor, wasn't just involved with Sophie. He had done this before, with other women, always with the same pattern. He approached married women, gained their trust, made them feel desired again, and when they finally believed they had found a new chance at happiness, he destroyed them. Some lost their savings, others became estranged from their families, others were emotionally devastated. But Sophie wasn't just another one on the list. There was something different about the way he acted towards her. Daniel felt a growing weight with each discovery. Sophie hadn't just gotten involved with another man. She had been manipulated. Maybe he didn't realize it, maybe he believed he was experiencing genuine passion, but it was all just a well-elaborated plan. And the worst, the detective discovered that Victor had a reason for all of this. He didn't choose Sophie by chance. He knew exactly who she was and, more importantly, he knew exactly who Daniel was. Daniel's blood ran cold when he received the last information. Victor had already crossed his path before, years ago, in a situation that he didn't even remember clearly. But for Victor, it had been an unforgettable humiliation. A broken professional agreement, a lost opportunity due to a decision Daniel made in the past, without imagining that one day it would come back to haunt him. Victor had planned everything. He wanted revenge. And the cruelest way to get it was through Sophie. Daniel felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. He couldn't accept that his wife had been used as a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. But at the same time, I knew she wasn't innocent. Sophie had made choices. She had allowed it. And now he would pay the price. He confronted her the next day, expecting to find regret, despair, an attempt to justify what could not be justified. But he only found a broken, confused woman, trying to understand how everything had gotten there. When he threw the evidence on the table, when he laid out every detail about Victor, Sophie's face changed. The shock, the horror, the guilt. She finally realized that she had been tricked. But for Daniel, it made no difference. The damage was already done. The betrayal had already happened. And now, the truth was staring them in the face. He stood up, ready to leave, to end this once and for all. But before he could turn away, Sophie grabbed his arm. His eyes were full of tears, his voice cracked, but there was a truth in his words that Daniel hadn't expected. She didn't want to lose everything. But it was too late. Daniel knew that regardless of how Sophie felt now, nothing would change the fact that she chose another man. You chose to believe in an illusion. She chose to cheat, when he would never have done the same to her. And now, all that was left was a broken marriage, a life in ruins, and a future he never imagined he would have to rebuild alone. But at that moment, one thing became clear. He wasn't the only one who would lose everything. And Sophie still had no idea what was coming. Daniel stared at Sophie as if he were seeing her for the first time. There was something in her eyes that he had never noticed before. It wasn't just guilt or regret, it was fear. Fear of what was yet to come. He felt his own heart pounding in his chest, but his mind was clear. The truth was there, naked and cruel. She had given herself to a man who never loved her, a man who used her as a pawn in a dirty game he didn't even know he was playing. Their marriage wasn't just a lie, it was a trap. The silence that weighed between them was broken by her trembling voice. "I didn't know," Sophie said, her breathing irregular, her eyes teary. "I did not know." Daniel repeated, laughing ironically. "Do you want to make me believe that you were deceived? That you didn't notice anything?" "I thought," she hesitated, looking down, the words dying in her throat. "What did you think?" He took a step forward, anger mixed with exhaustion. "Did you think he was your great love? Did you think I would never find out? Or did you think I would just sit here and accept this like an idiot?" She swallowed hard, her hands shaking. Daniel had never spoken to her like that. He had never looked at her with such contempt. "I was stupid," she whispered. "Stupid?" He ran his hands through his hair, laughing humorlessly. "Stupid is not enough. You destroyed our life. You destroyed everything for a scoundrel who just wanted to get to me." Sophie shook her head, tears falling now. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But it hurt," Daniel interrupted. "And there's no going back." She sobbed, trying to find something to say, something that would make him stop, that would make him feel something other than that cold fury. "I loved you," she murmured. Daniel was silent for a moment, just staring at her. "And I loved you," he finally said, but the words came out empty, without weight. Sophie's eyes closed for a second, as if that was the worst thing she could hear. The environment was suffocating, filled with everything that hadn't been said before, with everything that could never be fixed. Daniel took a deep breath and took a step back, moving away from her as if he needed space to remain standing. "I can't do it anymore," he said, quietly but firmly. Sophie's eyes widened, her lips parted as if she wanted to beg. "Don't do that," her voice broke mid-sentence. He closed his eyes for a second, trying to contain the pain that was growing inside him. But there was nothing more to be done. He opened the door and turned away without looking back. The night air was cold when he stepped outside, but Daniel felt nothing but the emptiness that consumed him inside. He walked aimlessly for a while, letting his thoughts run wild. But then, something inside him woke up. He wasn't going to let Victor escape. Not after all. Victor didn't expect the truth to come out so quickly. He was sitting in a fancy bar, a satisfied smile on his lips as he held a glass of expensive whiskey. For him, this was just another game he was about to win. Sophie had already fallen, and Daniel must have been devastated enough already. He loved that part, the moment when the opponent realized he lost. But Victor underestimated Daniel. He didn't notice the presence until he felt a strong hand grab his shoulder firmly. He turned immediately, meeting Daniel's cold and cutting gaze. Victor's smile faltered for a second, but soon regained his composure. Well, he said, leaning back with false tranquility. "What do I owe to honor?" Daniel didn't respond right away. He just pulled up a chair and sat across from him, resting his elbows on the table. "Do you think you won?" Daniel asked, his voice low and controlled. Victor raised an eyebrow. This is not a game, my dear. People make choices. His wife did hers. Daniel clenched his jaw, feeling the anger bubbling beneath the surface. You chose the wrong person to play with. Victor laughed, bringing the glass to his lips. Oh, don't tell me. Are you going to hit me? Are you going to throw a drink in my face? No, Daniel smiled sideways. I just wanted to see you one last time before I finish you off. Victor stopped mid-sip. What are you talking about? Daniel leaned forward. I know who you are. I know what you do. I know every person you've ever deceived. And now, everyone will know too. Victor's smile disappeared completely. You have no proof. Daniel laughed quietly. I have more than enough. And now, I have a detective, a lawyer and a media hungry for stories like this. Your little game is over, Victor. The silence between them was charged. Victor narrowed his eyes, assessing him. You think you can destroy me? I don't think so. I know. Victor snorted, trying to maintain his pose, but something in his gaze revealed that he knew Daniel wasn't bluffing. You're pathetic, Victor growled. Still trying to save your bruised ego. Daniel stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket. My ego is intact. But your reputation? Let's see how long it lasts. He turned and left the bar without looking back. For the first time, Victor felt a shiver run down his spine. He had underestimated the wrong man. And now, he was the one who would lose everything. The bar was left behind, but the feeling of victory was not enough to fill the emptiness that grew inside Daniel. He walked through the streets, feeling the cold wind cutting into his face, but his mind was far away, reliving every detail of what had just happened. He had faced Victor, looked into the eyes of the man who destroyed his life and, in a way, won. But why didn't he feel satisfied? Why was the weight in my chest still there, like something was missing? Victor's words echoed in his mind. People make choices. Your wife made hers. It was true. Sophie chose. And now, what was left? Just wreckage of something that was once a marriage, a partnership, a lifetime. He knew that no matter how much he exposed Victor, nothing would erase the betrayal. Nothing would change what happened. The phone vibrated in his pocket, interrupting his thoughts. He picked up the device and saw Sophie's name on the screen. He stared at the display for a long time before deciding to answer. What do you want? His voice was cold, emotionless. On the other end of the line, the silence was too long. When Sophie finally spoke, her voice was choked. I need to see you. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling tiredness taking over his body. For what? I need to tell you something, in person. He took a deep breath. There was something in her voice that wasn't just guilt or despair. It was something deeper, something he couldn't identify. I don't know if I want to hear it, he replied, sincerely. Please, one last time. Against his better judgment, he accepted. The meeting took place in a discreet cafe, far from any known eyes. When Daniel arrived, Sophie was already there, sitting in a far corner, holding a cup in both hands as if it were the only thing keeping her stable. He slowly approached and sat down in front of her. Sophie's eyes were red, and there was something broken about her that Daniel had never seen before. Say what you have to say, he cut in bluntly. She took a deep breath, straightening herself in her chair as if she needed to gather the strength to speak. I know that nothing I say will change what happened. And I don't even expect it to change. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. Daniel laughed quietly, without humor. Then why did you do it? Because I was lost. Because I let someone convince me that I was no longer enough for you, and maybe you were no longer enough for me. He crossed his arms, looking at her skeptically. And now you realize that you were used? Sophie nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I feel like an idiot. I thought I was rediscovering something in myself, but in the end, I just lost myself even more. And now? What do you want? She hesitated, her fingers gripping the cup tighter. I don't want the last thing you remember about me to be my betrayal. Daniel blinked slowly, letting the weight of those words sink in. Do you think I can just erase this? No, Sophie lowered her gaze. But I hope that one day, when all this is just a distant memory, you can remember who I was before all this. He was silent for a moment, processing what she was saying. I don't know if I can. I understand. One more break. The cafe was full, but between them, there seemed to be only the silence of a love that no longer existed. You know he just wanted to destroy me, don't you? Daniel finally said. Sophie nodded, her eyes teary. I know. And yet, you believed him. She closed her eyes for a moment, a lone tear running down her cheek. Yes. Daniel looked at that woman in front of him, that woman he once loved more than anything, and realized that he no longer felt angry. I just felt tired. I can't forgive you, he said at last. Sophie nodded again, as if she had already expected it. I can't forgive myself either. He stood up, ready to leave. But before leaving, he looked at her one last time. I hope one day you find something true. Sophie tried to smile, but her expression was too broken for that. I hope you do too. Daniel left the cafe without looking back. The cold of the night seemed lighter than before. The pain was still there, but for the first time he felt like he could breathe. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew he would move on. And this time, alone. Daniel left the cafe feeling that a phase of his life had ended there, in that last look he exchanged with Sophie. He no longer felt anger, nor a burning desire for revenge. There was just a feeling of exhaustion, as if I had been carrying a weight for too long. The cold night air bit his skin, but he didn't even feel it. He just walked aimlessly, letting his thoughts flow without resistance. For the first time in a long time, I didn't want answers. What I needed to know, I already knew. Whatever there was to feel, he already felt. Now all that was left was to move forward. As he crossed the street, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He hesitated for a moment before picking it up. I didn't want any more surprises, no new chapter in this story that should have already ended. But when he saw the detective's name on the screen, he knew he had to answer. Any news? His voice was tired, but still firm. On the other side, the detective took a deep breath before responding. Yes. And I don't know if you want to know. Daniel stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, closing his eyes for a moment. There was always more. There was always something he didn't know yet. House. The detective hesitated for a second before continuing. Victor isn't just running away from the media after the revelations we leaked. He's running from much worse people. What you discovered about him was just the surface. The guy has enemies, Daniel. People who will not only expose you, but completely destroy you. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. That means Sophie could be in danger. That sentence hit Daniel like a punch in the stomach. He thought he had emotionally distanced himself from her, that there was nothing left there but memories. But upon hearing those words, a primitive instinct awakened within him. It didn't matter what she had done. It didn't matter how much she had messed up. He couldn't just leave her vulnerable. Where is she now? At home, as far as I know. But she may not be safe for long. Daniel was already crossing the street before he even fully processed the situation. He didn't know exactly why he did that. Maybe it was just a reflection of years of protecting Sophie, of years of believing his role was to be there for her no matter what. Maybe it was the simple fact that he didn't want Victor to win in any way, not even by leaving behind another victim. The walk to the house that was once theirs seemed longer than ever. Each step carried the weight of memories he no longer wanted to revisit. He knew that that house was no longer his, that that marriage was no longer his, but at that moment, all of that was irrelevant. When he reached the door, he knocked loudly. He heard hurried footsteps on the other side and, within seconds, Sophie opened it. His eyes were red, his face tired. He could see that she hadn't slept properly in days. "Daniel," her voice came out in a whisper. "You need to get out of here. Now." She frowned, confused. "What?" He entered without waiting for an invitation, closing the door behind him. "Victor is running away. And the people who are after him could very well come after you too." She blinked a few times, trying to process the information. "How do you know that?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you need to get out of here." Sophie crossed her arms, and Daniel recognized that defensive posture. "I can't just run away. This is already over." "No, Sophie. This is not over. And if you think Victor will just disappear without consequences, you're wrong." She hesitated, tension visible on her face. "Where would I go?" Daniel ran a hand over his face, exasperated. "You have a family. Friends. Anywhere is better than here. And you?" It froze for a second. "What do I have?" She looked into his eyes, and there was something different there. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't despair. It was raw sincerity, something he hadn't expected to see. "Do you care about me, even after everything?" Daniel felt his breathing become heavy. How could he respond to that? He wanted to say no. He wanted to say that she didn't mean anything anymore, that he was just there because he hated losing. But that would be a lie. "I won't let you be destroyed by him either," was all he could say. She looked away, biting her lip. "I never wanted things to end like this." But they finished. Another silence. Another space between them that could never be filled. Finally, Sophie nodded. "I'm going to get out of here." Daniel just nodded. He didn't know where she would go or how long she would be gone. But, for the first time, he felt that chapter was truly closing. He took a step back, ready to leave. But before he could reach the door, Sophie called out to him. "Daniel." He stopped, waiting. She hesitated for a second before continuing. "Are you going to be okay?" He let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know." She nodded slowly. "I hope you stay." He looked at her one last time before leaving. The night felt colder than before, but somehow he felt like he could finally breathe. It didn't matter what Sophie did from there. It didn't matter what happened to Victor. For the first time in a long time, what mattered was what he would do. And this time, he would choose himself. Days turned into weeks, and the dust from the storm began to settle. Daniel moved forward the only way he knew how, by rebuilding his life from scratch, without looking back. The past was a weight he refused to carry. The destroyed marriage, the betrayal, the feeling of having been deceived, all of it was still there, slowly healing, but no longer defining him. He learned that some pain never completely goes away, it just becomes easier to carry over time. He started traveling, found new challenges at work and, unexpectedly, allowed himself to meet new people. The world didn't stop because he was betrayed. And neither does he. Sophie disappeared for a while. She temporarily moved to a distant cousin's house, away from all the judging eyes, away from the memories that haunted her. She looked back and no longer recognized the woman she once was. The betrayal seemed small compared to what really happened. She became a plaything, a piece of revenge from a man who never loved her. The guilt weighed heavily on her shoulders, crushing her every night. She lost Daniel, lost the trust of everyone around her, and worst of all, lost herself. As much as he wanted to go back in time, he knew that nothing would erase what he did. The pain of your choice would be an eternal burden. Victor, in turn, did not have the luxury of regret. When his frauds were exposed, things began to fall apart uncontrollably. What was once a calculated game was now a desperate race to escape the consequences of their own actions. He tried to hide, he tried to escape, but the people he deceived were not willing to forgive him. His reputation was publicly shattered, his connections disappeared, and the doors that once opened for him were now sealed forever. A man like him couldn't survive without influence. What happened to him after that? Nobody knew for sure. Some said he fled to another country, others that he was found and that the outcome was much worse. But in the end, what mattered was that he disappeared from Daniel and Sophie's lives forever. The destiny of each of them was shaped by their own choices. Daniel started again, stronger than before, without allowing the betrayal to define him. Sophie lived with the weight of her mistake, carrying within herself the guilt of a love she destroyed. Victor faced the shadows he created, with no one to save him. The end came to everyone differently, but each reaped exactly what they sowed. Now we want to know your opinion. What did you think of this story? Comment below, share your thoughts and tell us which part impacted you the most. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now for more stories like this. Here, we do not support any kind of betrayal, and each story is a reminder that every choice has a consequence. Thanks for sticking around until the end, and we'll see you next time.